Hey guys, in this video we're going to be talking about one of the derivatives of carboxylic acids, which are esters. We're going to be learning how to identify the functional group and how to name compounds that contain the ester functional group. The difference between the carboxylic acid and the ester is just having the absence of an OH group. So in an acid you will have an OH group after the carbonyl, but in case of ester you will have an OR group or an alkyl group after instead of having the hydrogen. So that's when the ester steps in. So this is one way of representing the ester where the R1 and the R2, they could be very well different alkyl groups or they could be the same groups. In that case, you could just call those R on both sides. If I want to write this in the condensed form, I would just say R1COO R2, or I could even write down R1CO2 R2. Okay, let's try to name the esters. So there are a couple of things in the esters you want to worry about. So the chain that you're going to have, or the R group that you're going to have after the oxygen onto the right side here, is going to be acting as your side chain, or you can call that either methyls or ethyls depending on how many carbons you have, and your main chain is going to be where you're going to have your ester or where you're going to have your carbonyl. So the main chain has two carbons, so it's going to end up obviously with the ethane. Now how would you really put the other side of the oxygen into the naming? You just call that methyl since there is only one carbon in there. So this particular compound is going to be called a methyl, and since there's two carbon, it's going to be called an ethane. Now how do you really change the last part of the name when you have an ester functional group? When you have an ester functional group, you replace the last part with O8. So in case of acids, you call it oic acid, but here you're going to be calling it an O8. So it's a methyl ethanoate. Now also remember the common name for this particular, when you have two carbons and then two oxygens there, is an acetate. That's where the acetic acid kind of comes in. So this could also be called a methyl acetate. So that's another common name that's used to name this compound, these type of compounds. Okay, let's look at this one. What if you have like an like a halogen or some other branched chain on the other side of the oxygen? Then how would you name it? Well, just focus on the left part first and figure out how many carbons you got in the main chain. It's got 1, 2, 3, 4. And then on the right side, I have 1 and 2. So 2 carbons, so obviously it's going to end up with an ethyl. But then there is a bromine on the second carbon. So you want to name that part of the chain first before you naming your parent chain. So since you have a bromine on the second carbon, I would call it 2-bromo. And since there is two carbons on the right side of the oxygen, it's going to be called an ethyl. So it's a 2-bromo ethyl. And then after that, well, we're just going to call it butanoate. So it's just going to be butane. And then since it's an ester, it's going to be an O8. So it's a butanoate. Okay. What about if you have side chains on the parent chain? It's going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 here. So it's got five carbons in the parent chain, and on the second carbon and on the third carbon you got the methyl group, and on the other side of the ester group we got this side chain here. So since you got 3 carbons, what's that going to be called? Well, that one is called an isopropyl. So it's going to be isopropyl, and then on the second and the third position you got the methyl group, so it's going to be 2,3-dimethyl, and then since you got 5 carbons in the main chain, it's going to be pentanoate. Okay, what if you have an aromatic ester, something like this? If you guys recall, um, this part right there is going to be called in a benzoate, because remember it comes from a benzoic acid, so it's going to be called in a benzoate. And since you have this methyl group there, so when you put it together, your alkyl group on the other side of the ester is named first, so it's going to be methyl, and then you have benzoate. So there isn't a space between when you're calling the R group on the other side of the O, and when you're calling the main chain that's on the ester. So that's going to be called a methyl benzoate. You will find some of the esters present in the fruits. So for example, in bananas, you have this particular type of ester. So when you buy some juice, sometimes they don't really have fruits in there, but rather it's just the flavor. So this particular compound, if you can make that in the lab, and if you can put that in the water, it's going to give you a flavor of bananas. All right, so let's see, how would you name this? Well, I have 2 carbons in the main chain. And how many carbons I got on the side chain there, on the secondary chain? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So it's going to be a pentyl. So I call that pentyl. And since you got 2 carbons on the main chain, you can call that ethanoate. That's one way of naming it. So remember, the ethanoate is also called acetate. So that's going to be the other name for it. It's a pentyl acetate. What about another flavoring chemical that's present in the oranges? So if you buy an orange juice, sometimes it's just going to be this flavor, depending on where you're getting this from. So it's got 7 carbons, technically a total of 8 carbons on this on the chain on the right side. So what's that going to be called? It's going to be octyl, because that's coming from octane. And so you have 2 carbons on the main chain. It's going to be acetate, so it's octyl acetate, or you can also call that octyl ethanoate. What about something like this one? This particular ester is going to be in pineapples, and seems like I got 1, 2, 3, 4 carbons in the main chain, and then I have only 2 carbons on this alkyl chain, or 2 on the other side of the ester. So it's going to be ethyl butanoate. Okay, so that's how you're going to be naming different esters. Just make sure you're able to identify the main chain and your side group there.